If you are a student registered for this class, don't forget to sign in. If you still need the QR code, I think that by now everyone already signed in. Don't forget to make sure that you get the credit for being here today. In general, I want to remind there are about 30 people already online listening to us. We have a lot of students this year that are registered, and first priority is for students. And then if there is a little bit extra spots, so students that are not registered, and then other people can always join us, but you can always also listening online, even so it's more fun to be here, we know. So today we have a great speaker. We have Commissioner Monahan, Patty, coming to us and saying visiting us, but I think that probably she's been to this room like 3 times in the last month at least, maybe more, maybe more. Because Commissioner Monahan is also a board member, the Institute of Transportation Studies board, and kind of familiar with what we are doing here for many years, and it's great to have her presenting to you today. I will try to, without reading, see what I remember from her CV, but I will make it very short. So Commissioner Monahan was appointed by Governor Newsom in 2019 as one of the 5 commissioners on the California Energy Commission. And each commissioner have their own topic, and Commissioner Monahan is the one that is doing the transportation, among other things. And that's kind of where we are working together. And before that, she was in a foundation, the Energy Foundation, that works quite a lot in the US and in China. And actually, I met her in China many years ago when we were trying to export the ZEV mandate to China. And I think that that's one of the biggest success of California is not how many electric cars are being sold today in California, but how many electric cars are being sold and made in China, part of our work. And before that, she was working with other NGOs on transportation, and as she told some of the students over lunch, with the EPA for a short time, and many years of experience that I'm really happy that she are here to share with us. I have to say that for me, you know, we can be very cynical sometimes about our decision makers, the guys at the top. Do they know what they're doing or not? I can say that working with Patty and working with the people in California, it's again and again reassured the understanding that the people that make the decision know what they're doing because they are listening, they are experts, and it's great to know that we are in a state that people that know what they are working on actually making the decision. So I'm really happy to have you here and sharing your thank you.
Well, thanks, Gil. And great to be here. I actually thought the group that met for lunch was the group, and now I'm like, wait, this is a big group. So before I dive into my PowerPoint, Gil suggested I share a little bit about my trajectory, how I got here. So sorry for the folks that were here at lunch. You're gonna hear it's redundant for you, but so when I started out, I wasn't working on transportation, but I always wanted to work on climate. And when I started out, you know, this was 4 decades ago, going to college. Was it more than 4 decades ago? More than 4 decades ago. And climate wasn't really a thing. You know what I mean? Like for you guys, you're like, oh yeah, of course, climate change is real, and the planet, we have these wildfires, we see the change. But when I was in school, it wasn't. Nobody really talked about it. It was pretty rare. But I thought, well, for me at least, I was like, what's the biggest problem I could think of to tackle? And, you know, something where I could spend my entire career kind of feeling good about what I was doing. And so that's how I landed in the climate space. And I went to college, I studied, my master's thesis was on an international carbon trading system. I actually did it, you know, in classic academic style, like what does it look like to have intergenerational equity with carbon emissions? So I tracked all the carbon. I worked at this place called IIASA. Anybody heard of it? The International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, the nerdiest name of an organization ever. Anyway, I did this kind of esoteric research, and I worked at Lawrence Berkeley Lab for a while doing this kind of esoteric research, or what I thought was pretty esoteric. And I ended up at US EPA, and I was working there for a number of years. And for me, I found my soul just kind of like dying inside. I would go to work, I would dread it. I felt like all I was doing was implementing policies that other people were developing. And I really wanted to be more like an advocate and a change maker than an implementer. And I got lucky. I got interviewed at this place called the Union of Concerned Scientists. And they hired me to work on reducing harmful diesel pollution. And my first task was to grade the performance of school buses and the emission performance across the entire fleet of school buses and across the entire country. So I gave like an A to F grade. Anybody guess what California got in terms of diesel pollution performance on their school bus fleet?
D minus.
What's that?
D minus.
Close. Keep going down. Yeah, California at the time had the oldest, dirtiest school bus fleet in the country. California also had a policy, as Californians want to do, to reduce that and pollution. And so they were trying to turn over the buses, but basically because we have good weather, we don't have snow, and we have a lot of students. I mean, these buses just were more durable than the ones in the Midwest that were exposed to the elements. And so we had a very dirty fleet. And I worked at the Union of Concerned Scientists for about a decade. I worked my way up from senior analyst to the California office director and also the deputy director of their clean vehicles program. So I had two hats, and I really loved actually working in the nonprofit world. If anybody wants to ask me later about that, I found it really just fun and inspiring, and you could just like, you know, you could just use your creativity to figure out how am I going to influence policymakers to make the right decision? What kind of analysis do I need to do to show like a path forward from the policy side? So it was a very satisfying job. You know, after 10 years, I was like, yeah, I'm ready for something different. And I went into the foundation world. So I worked at this foundation, Energy Foundation, funded campaigns in the US and supported a team in China to advance clean transportation. And we only worked on two legs of the stool. We worked on fuel policy and vehicle policy, not VMT. And I'm curious, how many people in this room are working on like smart growth, vehicle miles traveled? How many folks are working? I know some of you are. Just raise your hand vigorously. People are, okay, not very many people. I thought there were more. So
I work with Susan, yes.
yeah, I think almost anybody who's working with Susan should be raising their hand.
I'm not specifically looking into VMT policies.
But anyway, at the foundation, we didn't look at VMT because honestly, it's an expensive strategy and it's a hard strategy. Whereas vehicle standards, fuel standards, it's pretty much, you can figure out the dollar in, the carbon tons out, and really just prioritize what you're going to fund based on where you're going to get the most tons per dollar spent. And in China, like I had the privilege actually of working with our China team and developing all their transportation strategies. I basically like facilitated the development of strategies in China. And it was a pretty unique experience because we brought in like think tanks from China with some experts in the US who were mostly Chinese and hired a translator. And then I facilitated this like strategy session, multiple strategy sessions. It turned out, of course, our translator was a spy. All the stories about China are true. I would say I've been approached by spies many times now, every time I go to China as a government. Do you guys know this? That the translators are often spies? I didn't know this. It was a surprise to me when we found out. Anyway, I wrote a strategy and I actually didn't believe it. Like the strategy said, we're gonna leapfrog internal combustion engines. We are gonna be the biggest EV manufacturer in the world. And we're gonna export those vehicles. We're gonna dominate the battery supply chain. And I wrote this strategy. Like I'm writing it, I'm like, bullshit, that's not gonna happen. Sorry for swearing, I'm a swearer. And it kind of did happen, I gotta say. And it wasn't because of the strategy per se, you know, the government wanted to do this. And so it was, you know, and government think tanks were involved in the writing of the strategy. So they were part of it, part and parcel of it. But, you know, China really, if you want to understand transportation, you've got to go to China and understand what's happening in China. But I decided at some point, again, at a 10-year point at the foundation, I was like, you know, I need something different. I wanted to do something different. And I thought, well, we are at this pivotal moment in clean transportation. And in some way, I like to say, I've waited my whole career for this moment, because this is when we see the transition to zero emission transportation happening before our eyes. I mean, you guys are so lucky to be like part of this transition, because I mean, we're at kind of the early stages in California and globally, but I see where we can go. You know, I see a zero emission transportation future. We have to solve some problems that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. But that's what really spurred me to try to get a job in the Newsom administration. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, how do you get a job? I don't know how to do this. I'm not political. And so I met with this woman, Mary Nichols, who was the former, she was, I think at that time, the chair of the Air Resources Board. Now she's retired. And she's a powerful woman. She's a little scary. She was actually rated in Time magazine one of the 100 most powerful people in the world because of all that California is doing on the transportation side. And so I called her up. I interfaced with her for many years. And I was like, Mary, what should I do? And she's like, oh, you should volunteer in the Newsom campaign. Put your name out there. Apply for positions. You actually just like apply on a website. And so I did all that. I joined the policy team, I wrote policy positions, and I've been on multiple administration. I would recommend that also for anybody who's interested in political stuff, is like did it for Clinton, I actually did it for Biden on the transition team. And it's fun to like apply what you know from a technical standpoint to the policy world. So anyway, I did that, and then I really wanted to work on infrastructure for zero emission transportation, because the vehicle standards, we know what we're doing. Honestly, it's a formula. And you know, there's things that you can tweak, this and that, but we know what we're doing. On the infrastructure side, we do not really know what we're doing. So it's kind of fun because you're in this like new space. And some graduates of UC Davis are actually helping us figure out what we need on the infrastructure side. And we want you guys to come work for us because we have jobs. But I think that's enough of me. Now we can do, and just feel free to interrupt and ask questions. I don't want to just talk. In fact, I don't have enough information up here just to talk. So raise your hand if you don't understand what I'm saying. If you want to make a comment, just feel free to just chime in. So I'm going to talk about California and transportation. Talk a little bit about the Energy Commission. And raise your hand if you know who the Energy Commission is. Oh, wow. That's more than I would have guessed. I always think of like the Energy Commission is kind of the awkward, dorky sibling to the Air Resources Board. The Air Resources Board is like famous and they're cool. And the CEC is a little like nerdier and we're not so famous. And we don't, you know, just have that international cachet. But because infrastructure is becoming such a critical piece of this zero emission transportation future, I'd say we're getting a little bit more power, more influence, you know, more thorny issues coming our way. Now, when it comes to this transition, there's different agencies. Like I said, we're the Energy Commission. We do like energy planning, energy analysis, infrastructure build out for zero emission transportation. ARB, of course, does the vehicle standards. They also do the vehicle, like they give out incentives. The Public Utilities Commission is the one that oversees the utilities that are the big investor-owned utilities. And those are really critical for preparing the grid for electrification. There's so much work happening on that side. They're a really important partner. And then the California Independent Systems Operator, they do the big wires, they do the transmission wires. So when you connect like big solar, big wind, that's the wires that are bringing that into the distribution center. California has a goal by 2045, we want zero carbon from the grid. And that's distinct from carbon neutrality, We also have a goal of carbon neutrality in the state, but zero carbon from the grid means you're not trading, you're basically like just zeroing out all emissions from the grid. We're at about, actually, we're at 61% today, compared to 40-ish% in 2013. You can see our goal is by 2035, 90% and 100% by 2045. And I always like to start on the electricity side because it's really important to understand that the grid is a decarbonization strategy. And that is like really only in the last 5 years has that been kind of obvious. But 6 years ago, that it was not obvious. And one of the key ways we are using the grid as our decarbonization strategy is that we're storing energy at times when we have an excess amount of solar energy in batteries. And this is a big California success story that, you think of California and you're like, it's hard to build. It's like, everything moves slowly, like molasses, so many state regulations, it's very expensive. But when it comes to batteries, there's been a transformational growth in battery storage. So we went from like less than a gig in 2019 to over 13 gigawatts in 2024. It's just been this tremendous amount of growth. Most of this is utility scale, but some of it is residential. Anybody know Powerwalls? Anybody heard of Powerwall? Like Tesla Powerwalls, which is basically you have your solar energy, then you have your like little Powerwall that captures solar energy. And then that is actually a grid asset. It's distributing energy back into the system. And we have a state goal of having 52 gigawatts, 52,000 megawatt hours by 2045. And we're a quarter of the way there in just 5 years, basically. So, and this is actually was in the, and I realize I'm standing in front of the slides. Who told me? So this was in the New York Times in May. And I want to say 2 years ago, there was just like a moment when California was running 100% of its grid on zero carbon resources. Just a moment. And then you could see all the batteries. So this is the batteries in the beginning, nuclear, hydro, wind, gas. We have all this solar power. And now what we're having is when the sun goes down, the batteries are kicking in. Before the sun comes up, the batteries are kicking in. And that has led to a total of, actually I'll show the next slide. So the total amount is now equivalent to 45 days. We have met this year, just this year, 45 full days of meeting demand with 100% clean electricity. And it's because of batteries. It's really because of batteries. You could see like this is demand. You can see the batteries coming in to supplement solar. And it's when this green is higher, that means 100% of our energy is being met by renewable energy. And so you could see this future, right? Where more batteries, more storage. And I want to emphasize the batteries we have now aren't good enough. They're 4-hour batteries, they're lithium ion. Sorry, so many political people calling me all the time. I lost my train of thought.
Batteries are not good enough.
Batteries aren't good enough. We need long duration energy storage. So we need batteries that we need ways to store energy for long periods of time. Yes.
Speaking of energy storage, how does like gravity-based energy storage that is like, pump water between two reservoirs compare with current battery energy, and is still like applicable considering the rate of development of like modern batteries?
Yeah. So pumped hydro is actually a really effective way to store. I mean, it's like stupid storage, right? You just move it up a hill and bring it back down, and you have energy from that pumped hydro. It's actually very effective for long duration energy storage. Hard because it takes a lot of land and has impacts to the environment. And so I would say that is a real possibility, but it's not a scalable one. It's a pretty limited resource. And so we really need, I mean, one of the people are looking at the potential for hydrogen potentially to be one of those long duration energy storage. Batteries are evolving very quickly. And that's what I would just say, like, the evolution in battery technology is staggering. And I think we're gonna see some interesting things come in the kind of traditional battery side.
Just a quick question, do you know how much extra solar capacity we have, like, how much energy?
Yeah, we have a lot. I mean, this is the issue, that we're curtailing like record amounts of solar energy. And, you know, the amount that we have to curtail is really like, as we develop more technologies to capture that, that curtailed amount should go down. But we're also adding new renewables onto the grid all the time. And we're looking to add some renewables like offshore wind that would have kind of like the same as baseload, almost the same reliability as a gas system. The challenge of renewables, they're intermittent. We don't know exactly how much we're gonna have on any given day. So having more types of renewable energy that are more durable in terms of reliability throughout the day is what we're looking for.
During these 1,000 hours where our supply exceeded demand, were we still running our like slow dispatchables like combined cycle gas and stuff? And
No,
so so we managed to turn all of those off?
I mean, this is. Yeah, that basically we're not using baseload all the time anymore.
Okay.
I'm a little bit skeptical about the idea of the turning off all the combined cycle because the ramp off and the ramp on and the ramp off. It takes, for example, 7 days for them to ramp on,
Fully ramp
fully ramp up, and then is it possible to turn off just for a few hours because we have the extra solar?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to follow up because I might be getting that wrong in terms of completely ramping down.
Okay.
I know, I mean, yeah, I'll follow up and I'll ask Gil to provide the information. Because I don't know how we could be saying we're meeting, we pull in a 45 days with 100% clean electricity unless we're ramping down, like what are we doing with those? That's a really good question, so I'll follow up.
But the KISO data doesn't suggest that those things get turned off.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right,
Well, normally clean energy is cheaper, so it gets sold first,
yes.
and everything else possibly
Maybe
is
it's
going
being,
turned into.
oh, it could be in the transmission sent to other
Yeah.
states.
Yes.
Oh, that's probably what's happening.
That's probably.
It's
Yeah, no, you're right. That's probably what's happening.
Sound like Android.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really good questions. And thanks for the help. All right, I want to talk about, unless there's more comments, questions? Yeah.
I have a question on like the life cycle of those batteries and like, like, because you're saying they're getting old and they're big. And so what is like the perspective of what are you gonna do like after with those batteries? And where are you gonna get the new ones? And
Yeah.
the technology is getting better, it's also like extracted somewhere else.
Yeah.
So like, how's that thought for the
Yeah, I think the issue of battery recycling is a really important one in terms of how do we guarantee that these batteries are being recycled. I think depending on the constituents of the batteries, there could be a really valuable use case for recycling because the IRA considers battery recycling to be domestic content. And so like there's a company called Redwood Materials that is attached to the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada. And they are recycling vehicle batteries right now. They're also trying to get like little batteries, which are harder to get. And I would say we need better policies around recycling because we want to make sure that there is full recycling. There is an economic incentive right now. I think we need to evaluate whether that's sufficient. And I think we know it's not sufficient for small batteries. So I want to just say like, since IRA, this is an analysis by this group that found that California is leading when it comes to clean tech investment. We're more than double what the next state, Texas, is getting in terms of investment. And the majority of this is, can you guess? What do you think it is?
Distributed.
Nope. Anybody? What are we here? Institute for Transportation. Yeah, it's actually clean transportation is the #1 reason. I always say California is the new Michigan when it comes to transportation. We're basically like, I mean, there's Tesla, but there's also a lot of other EV companies that are making their home here. We're also finding like motorcycles and, you know, also a hub for when it comes to autonomous transportation. So just California is ironically the place to be when it comes to clean transportation. So the state has a goal of reaching a 100% zero emission transportation future by 2045. And the reason why, so most of these goals actually came from Governor Newsom, who he was called to action in the wake of a terrible wildfire season. And he basically was like, we have to tackle the #1 source of global warming pollution in the state. That's transportation. Transportation is half of all emissions when you account for upstream, the production of the fuel itself. And so if you want to tackle climate in California, you have to get rid of greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. And he laid out really aggressive goals. So 100% of vehicle sales for new passenger vehicles, 100% of operations for drayage. You know, anybody know what drayage trucks are? Anybody want to say? What's a drayage truck?
Freight.
It's not freight. It's these ones that go basically from like ports to distribution centers or drayage. And they run off very like, usually run right through communities and they have established routes. So it's a little bit easier to figure out how to electrify them. But he also did off-road equipment, which is pretty tough. Like I would say that one I'm skeptical we're gonna meet. 100% of bus fleets by 2040, and then by 2045, 100% of operations of medium and heavy duty trucks. And so CARB has been busily developing regulations to tackle all of these. There's also goals around infrastructure to have 250,000 chargers installed by 2025 and 200 hydrogen stations by 2025. I would say this one, we'll come close, but I'm not sure if we'll meet, we'll come close. This one, I don't think we will not meet, the 200 hydrogen stations.
We already had 2 million cars sold.
And we're at 2 million cars sold this quarter. The governor will be making an announcement, don't spread this around. But sometime next week, the governor will announce we've surpassed 2 million. And our sales are doing pretty good despite what they say in the media. So here's our zero emission vehicle sales. And in 2024, you can see that we're at 1.9 million. And so this quarter, we're reaching 2 million. And we're about 26-ish% of new vehicle sales are zero emission. In terms of our infrastructure deployment, right now we have about a little bit over 150,000 public and shared private chargers. That means shared private would be like in a parking garage or in a multifamily dwelling unit. And we have, in terms of hydrogen stations, we have 42 operating and 20 that are not operating. They're counted as like we paid for them. They're stations, they exist, but they're just broken. They're broken. I would say, you know, the light duty hydrogen world is struggling right now. It basically, you know, we had a lot of optimism in California early that we could just like scale the market. And I would say it's not happening in California. It's not happening in Korea. It's not happening in Japan. So real questions about what's going to happen to the light duty fuel cell market. Anybody here work on light duty fuel cells? You?
In grad school. Is it
In grad school.
for EcoCard?
Ah. Well, it's tough sledding. I can talk about that, but it seems like nobody's working on it. I don't want to go
They're
to
quite
only one.
complicated.
I have a question.
Yeah.
About the chargers, do you have any rules regarding the access to the chargers? Meaning, you know, that you have to provide free access, no restriction for types
No.
of payments, pre-contractual arrangements?
No, but we're working on that. I'll talk about it in a little bit. So our agency, like I said, we do analysis. Actually, former UC Davis students are doing this analysis about what kind of infrastructure we're going to need for light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. On the light duty side, basically our current base scenario says we're going to need about 1 million chargers by 2030. We are also exploring right now a fast charge focus, because what we're seeing in the market is like a lot more interest in fast charging by consumers, by the providers of the charging equipment. And, you know, if you, and so we're considering moving from our base scenario to this fast charge focus, which will bring us from 1 million down to like 650,000 chargers. And so that's a scenario we're evaluating. I think we're probably going to move to this fast charge focus, so a reduced number, but more fast charging to make sure that everybody can refuel. We're also tracking medium and heavy duty vehicles. So like I said, CARB has these very aggressive regulations around clean trucks and clean fleets. And, you know, I think the limiting factor, there's a limiting factor on the truck access, but there's a bigger limiting factor on the zero emission vehicle refueling side of the equation. So we're tracking that right now. We're seeing about 2,000 operating ports for trucks and for buses. We're also seeing hydrogen stations and a lot of interest in hydrogen when it comes to medium and heavy duty transportation. So we're funding a fair amount of hydrogen stations. These are the stations that are open right now, but we're funding more that are in the pipeline. So we have 4 public stations, 5 private stations. Transit districts love hydrogen, and a lot of them are looking at hydrogen and fuel cells as how they're going to comply with California's regulations. I think the key will be, like right now, hydrogen is made from natural gas. And how do we move from a natural gas-based system to a truly renewable and clean hydrogen system is really the question that California is hoping to grapple with and address. If you guys haven't checked out our ZEV dashboard, this is our ZEV dashboard. Check it out. Just put in ZEV dashboard CEC, and you can see the information we post, like light duty sales on a quarterly basis, medium and heavy duty on an annual basis, tracking all the infrastructure. And we're really trying to make sure that we can show California's progress and where we're not actually doing as well as we should be doing. On the medium and heavy duty side, this is interesting because we're finding, you know, that most of it would be depot, very little en route. But when it's en route, it, you know, basically it needs to be fast. And I would say, on a personal note, I'm finding kind of the opposite, that even depot not the opposite, that even depot charging is faster. And I'll show a slide about that. So we're also looking at an alternative future scenario where there's more, even at depot charging, that would have more like 500 kilowatt or higher chargers, gigawatt chargers is potential. And I would say for batteries to really penetrate the Class 8, the big trucks, you're going to need really fast charging. You're going to need really high powered charging. That has big impacts to the grid. And so thinking through how do we do this in a way that keeps our grid reliable, affordable, safe, and equitable is a challenge. So all this like integration with the grid is going to be work. There's a steady stream of work in this space and a lot of interest in trying to figure out what do fleets need? How do we make sure that we give fleets what they need while also keeping the grid affordable and safe? So, you know, I said in the beginning, like this transition is so new. And I can't emphasize that enough. Like we have developed these electricity systems for flat growth. So this shows, we do a demand forecast. Actually, a former student leads this work, Sivagunda, who's a fellow commissioner with me. And in 2018, you can see demand was flat. We projected out from 2018 to 2030, and it was like, oh yeah, ho-hum, flat growth. And so we have all of these regulatory systems at the Public Utilities Commission that are flat growth scenarios. So the Public Utilities Commission looks over 4 years when rate cases come in, they're just like, they have a 4-year horizon that they hold that they use to develop rates. And what we're seeing is a lot more dynamism in terms of our our need to electrify and to prepare the grid for this electrification. So you can see this was 2018, 2019, 2022, every year it's gone up. And so we have to like change a system that was built for flat growth to a system where we're like, oh no, plug in quickly, plug in everything you can. Like vehicles are the first, the camel's nose under the tent, buildings are coming, buildings are happening too. And the grid honestly isn't ready. So the grid is old. We're trying to make it, harden it for wildfire resilience. Also an interesting challenge. Has anybody read California Burning? Nobody? One person? Okay, read California Burning. It's anybody who's in the PG&E territory, it's like totally worth reading. But it's about like how, again, 10 years ago, we didn't even account for wildfire. We didn't even think wildfires were a risk to our grid. And now it's like, oh my God, wildfires are such a huge risk. They're causing our rates to go up. And we're really like seeing how the impacts of climate change are making it harder to fight climate change. And really trying to figure out like, what can we do to harden the grid? Because as I said, it's our primary decarbonization strategy. We have to harden the grid and we have to electrify it as rapidly as possible. I think that's creating tension between the efficiency people and the like electrification people. It's not like, I mean, of course you need both, but California has historically like been all in on efficiency and not so much on electrification. And now we're like, oh no, we got to electrify and we got to do it fast. So we look at what's the demand with what, for regulations that CARB has developed and that they think they're going to develop, what's going to be the implications for our electricity demand. And what we found is that by 2030, EVs are about 10%, so this is 2030, EVs are about 10% of our total load, but 5% of our peak load, and peak is what we care about the most, because peak is when we are more like constrained on the grid side. And so 5% isn't so much by 2030, but it's still something to be aware of. By 2035, actually, it's 10% of peak. And you can see how much we're just scaling up our demands for EVs on the grid. And so we just really need to be mindful, like we got to procure more renewable energy, we got to plug these vehicles into the grid, we got to get the grid ready for this. It's a lot of moving parts. We also analyzed, so we did this, you've seen all the analysis on the vehicle charging side. We've also done analysis on the truck side for hydrogen. And this is where it gets complicated. So basically, these are all like planned stations that are happening. The green dots are existing hydrogen stations. And you can see, so we mapped out different scenarios. We used CARB's scoping plan. CARB's scoping plan indicates that by 2035, we're going to need almost 1,800 stations. A report by the California Transportation Commission, more stations, over 2,100. ARCHES, which is California's big effort to develop clean renewable hydrogen here in the state, would have 117. That's a limited study, it's not really statewide. And then AAT3 is the CEC. And what we say is it's not happening. And so you can see it's all over the board. And our study, the CEC's analysis is based on like the price of hydrogen, pretty much just the price of hydrogen. Right now, the price of hydrogen is really high. It's over $30 a kilogram at the stations, which is, basically that's more than doubled over the last 2 years. And combined with the problems of the stations, the high price of the fuel, it's really hard for the light duty market to take off. When it comes to medium and heavy duty, especially like these transit districts, they're procuring their own hydrogen. It is all dirty hydrogen, let's face it, but they're procuring their own, they're getting long-term contracts. They're not paying that over $30 per kilogram that we're paying for passenger vehicle travel. And just to get a sense of what that is, it's basically on a gasoline equivalent basis, the hydrogen is like, you can basically squeeze, because fuel cells are more efficient, like twice the efficiency, so they're equivalent on an energy perspective, you get twice the efficiency. So basically, $30 is like a $15 per gallon gas cost. And so it's way too high for the average person. Like I said, we fund the build out of zero emission vehicle infrastructure. This is the money that we have to operate from, $1.8 billion that has, this is money from this year through fiscal year 2028. And we also are getting money from the federal government, so 384 million is expected from the federal government. And this is all money that we're giving out to build out infrastructure. So we're using that analysis that I'm pointing to help inform the investments we're making to build out infrastructure for zero emission transportation. And I want to talk about a few projects that, some of which we have funded, some of which we haven't, but just to show like California firsts. So we, this is Salim, and he runs this company, Watt EV, and they're providing charging as a service. They also have trucks that they're funding, and they're basically building these big depots throughout the state to fuel battery electric vehicles, battery electric trucks. They built the biggest solar and storage microgrid for EV chargers in Bakersfield. And they're looking at, basically using solar plus storage to help reduce the electricity cost, especially at certain times of the day where it can be very expensive to refuel your vehicle. This is me at the Pepsi facility in Sacramento, and Pepsi is using the Tesla Semi. They are finding like the drivers love them. It refuels in less than an hour. So this is the depot charging I was talking about. And it has a 500-mile range, fully loaded. So, in this kind of scenario, we've always thought like, oh, the future has to be hydrogen for goods movement because batteries just can't meet the needs. And I'm curious to find out, like, does Tesla shake up the Class 8 market like they did the light duty market, right? Tesla was like this out of the box. All the OEMs discounted them. They were like, you're not gonna make it, Tesla. And Tesla kind of blew everybody else out of the water, right? The Model Y, best-selling car. Like they really did show all the other automakers. You could think what you think about Elon Musk. He's something. But they really did shake this world and created a space for electric transportation to be mainstream. And my question is, could they do the same on the truck side? I honestly don't know. I don't know if Tesla will invest on the truck side because Elon is going all in now on robo-taxis, and who knows where that will lead in terms of the total investment portfolio of Tesla. But there's a potential that the Semi could really shake things up. And Pepsi's experience has been very, very positive. By the way, I got to drive it. It's fun. And then school buses, can we use electric vehicles and particularly school buses to power our grid? This is First Student Bus Yard in Richmond, California, which has a number of electric school buses. We basically are estimating that there's 35,000 in California in 2030, well, 35,000 with V2G capacity. That's the equivalent of powering 1 million homes. And so we're trying to figure out how do we unlock this potential. We're funding this project in Richmond. We're also seeing, like, this is a project in Oakland. Oakland converted all of their school buses. There's like 96 of them, I think. 74, not 96, 74 buses to electric. And this year, they are they're sending energy back to the grid with these school buses. This project kicked off in September. And I think we're gonna learn a lot about whether this is a scalable solution. The Energy Commission actually just recently, we got authority to evaluate whether there should be a vehicle to grid requirement and the ability to implement that requirement if we decide it should be. And so we'll be looking very closely at these kinds of studies and considering, should your car be required to send energy back to the grid? Again, in Oakland, right outside the port, we have the world's largest, did you have a question on that last one?
Yeah, just the last one.
Yeah.
With like a project like Oakland, like they have 70 something buses.
Yeah.
And you said the connectivity to the grid and how that works, like resupplying power and during peak times during the grid.
Yeah.
If they have 74 buses, but like only like 10 chargers, how does that work?
They have 74 chargers.
Oh,
Yeah, it only works if you have a charger.
yeah.
And you have to have a very specific kind of charger, not your average charger. Yeah.
Okay, and so this idea of requiring people to have the cars plugged in and providing electricity, would there be protections to keep the consumer from losing money on that? Because I could see that would be something like specifically California that people would be suspicious of because of how PG&E installs solar. And like, like the place I lived before, we had solar panels. It didn't really help on the bill because of the way they do solar, charging you for storage and stuff. And I could see that people might be leery of that if they felt like they were losing money.
Well, the requirement would be on the automakers to add that capability to their vehicles. Hyundai already has that capability. Actually, Tesla already has that capability.
Okay, so it's not forcing people to use it.
It's not forcing people to use it. And in fact, what it should do is save consumers money. So you would come home, let's say you come home from work at 5, you plug your vehicle in, that's often peak. And you could save money by having that vehicle discharge into the grid. And you could set different controls to say like, I don't want it to go below this amount, and then I want it to charge up again. I mean, it adds like complexity on the consumer side for sure, but it also adds a potential for value. You wouldn't have to get a battery for your home. You could just use your vehicle for that. Yeah, it opens the door to really inventive new business models. Okay, so like I said, this is the a hydrogen station that is testing out. There's 30 Hyundai Accent, I think they're called, vehicles, Class 8, big rig trucks, and they're testing out with this station with other stations, like basically using hydrogen and fuel cells for Class 8 trucks. And I think we're going to learn a lot from this project. Again, the price of hydrogen at this station, though, is quite high. I think it's close to $36 a kilogram. So a few things that the CEC is working on right now. One is basically requirements for state-funded chargers on reliability. And we got the authority from the legislature to put standards on anything that the state or ratepayers fund in terms of charging infrastructure. And I think you all know, like, charging infrastructure right now kind of sucks. It's very difficult unless you're a Tesla owner to charge your vehicle reliably. The automakers are all moving towards the Tesla standard. They're all moving towards like getting access to the Tesla network. And so we're hoping maybe in the future, there will just be one plug, the Tesla plug, and more reliable, charging for everybody. But in the meantime, it's a mess out there. I mean, it's a real mess. And so California, we're in the midst of passing these standards. And the UC Davis team is helping us a lot. Gil with his work to like test out what's happening in the real world today on chargers is like a critical piece to this. So we look at UC Davis as a real partner, not just because we want the students to come work for us, but also we hired UC Davis to do really critical studies. And I have this future, I call it one app that rules them all. Like one way, you just have an app and it says, hey, Patty, you gotta refuel your vehicle soon. Here's the charging stations near you. Here's how much it would cost for you to do it. Here's how long it would take. And then I could pick. I'd be like, well, that's cheaper. Oh, well, that's faster. And I could, I would have some choice. Like right now, you basically use plug share and you're like random, trying to find a charger that works and seeing if your vehicle's interoperable with it. And so it's a mess. And we hope our standards, which for the first time, the two things we're looking at is energization. Is the charger energized? And the second is, which is brand new, nobody's done it that we know of, successful charge attempt rate. So when you plug in, does it actually charge? So our proposal is 90%, that 9 times out of 10, you should be able to successfully charge your car the first time you put it in. And we're gonna see whether that is an appropriate standard. Like I said, it's never been done. As far as we know, in the world, it's never been done as a standard. And then you would ask about payment. So one of the other things we're working on is a rulemaking on payment methods. Like how do we, how are customers gonna pay for their charge session? Right now, there's state law that says it has to be, you have to be able to like tap so you can use your phone or a credit card and tap. And we're evaluating sort of what the future of payment should look like. We're also looking at what the future of roaming should be. Like should big companies, charging companies be forced to roam with other companies so you could have more of a seamless charging experience? We're looking at like testing interoperability. We have funding a symposium and an integration lab where we're testing whether these vehicles and the chargers are talking to each other. And looking at like how can we use standardization to drive a better customer experience. And from my mind, it's these nerdy things around standards and how you pay and like they all fit into this future of like a more seamless. We want to have not just a gas station reliability model, but like a better than gas station model where it's easier and you just plug in your vehicle, it starts to charge, it's super easy, you know how much you're paying. And right now that it doesn't exist except, if you're a Tesla owner, it exists, but everybody else is struggling. So I think like this is like a place where a lot of research could happen around how do we do this better and make it a better experience. If we don't fix this problem, we're gonna stay kind of stuck around 26%, I think, for a while, because I think we've saturated, as I'm sure you know better than me, but we've saturated the early market. We've saturated like the early adopters who are kind of like, I'll suffer a little bit, I'll do it. But to reach mainstream, to reach people who live in apartment buildings, reach people who have to travel a lot, we've got to do better. And this next 5 years, I feel like this is this critical moment for us to do better. If we don't do better, we're not gonna reach our sales goal as rapidly as we need to. I remain convinced like this is an inevitable future because electric drive is better. It's honestly more fun. And that 0 to 30, sometimes 0 to 60 acceleration is just so kick-ass. In fact, I was at Lucid just yesterday and I got to drive one of their cars and they were like, floor it. And so I floored it getting onto the freeway. It was petrifying. So flew back. They're honestly more fun. But, for everybody to have access to that more fun vehicle, we have to make it a lot easier to recharge them. And that's the moment we're in right now. Yeah.
Do you think that for upcoming rulemaking on payment methods, or has there ever been discussion about instead of tap and phone-based payments, maybe subscriptions or monthly payment or yearly payment on, you sign up for a specific kind of service that's available? Is that?
Yes, but state law requires there to also be an open part of the network. So charging providers today provide that. Like you can get a subscription for EVgo or Electrify America. But it's just for that network or for any ones that they have roaming agreements with. It's not for everybody. And I think our idea is like, well, you shouldn't have to download an app to be able to charge your car. You know, some people, like especially unbanked families, you know, you can't even get a credit card. How are you gonna pay? And anyway, so there's some equity issues at play here, and also just this idea that we want to make sure there's open access and it's really easy for everybody to charge. All right, I think that's it for my. That's it.
Questions, comments, ideas? I know that there are a lot of people here in the room that are working on these topics and have comments and ideas.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Quick question about enforceability of the last requirements. I was wondering, like, how do you envision the CEC enforcing the 97% of time?
Yeah, so we have the ability to claw back money since it's all state funded, state and ratepayer. We have the ability to claw back money. We can also send it to the AG, elevate to the AG if we think there's like an egregious violation. But it's something we're going to be seeking from the legislature is actually the ability to impose fines. We're also looking at the possibility of the legislature giving us power over reliability for all chargers, not just state and ratepayer funded ones. And that's something Governor Newsom himself has been like, well, we need to do more, and we need, like, if you come to California, shouldn't you be held to a certain minimum standard of performance? I think you should. Yeah.
So I really like the point you had on that last slide about trying to reduce the number of standards that are in evidence in the charging space. I presume you mean 15.11820. But I think we can still list like 10 or so different standards that a station and vehicle need to conform with, including IEC and OCPP and ISO. And I was wondering if maybe there's some regulatory effort in California to reduce the many thousands of pages of text standard that engineers at these companies need to be in conformance with to make it easier to determine that.
I mean, it's kind of the opposite, actually. I would say, like, we're looking at standardization as a really important strategy.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, how many different standards must you comply with to, I can't say like what the optimal number is. I can say it has been challenging with different standards. Like, we can't even, there's an effort going on right now in the federal government with the charging providers to figure out like consistent error codes.
Yes.
I mean, there's some things that are just so stupid. You're like, what? This is where there should be standardization, right? Because that makes it easier to repair chargers. A lot of the companies don't like standardization. They want to be kind of unique in their footprint, and it's, you know, we're balancing like, okay, you want to have like companies innovate and compete, but you also want to have a standardized experience for the consumer. One plug, not 3 plugs, which is what we have today, 3 different plugs. You want to have one plug, you want to have one like communication standard that everybody uses that talks to the credit card companies. The credit card companies have to do some work on this side too, to the chargers, to the vehicles. Like, we want it one language. And that's not what we have today.
But I think Dash 20 goes away to that, but I think we need a standard for standards almost. Like I was involved in the J3400 committee, and we have multiple conformance levels written out in the standards, so you could be compliant on one level and not compliant on another. And I don't think that standard adds any standardization to. Like, I think it does the opposite. It's a negatively productive standard, in my opinion.
The next one is?
Yeah. What you could look at it, and I'll show you the page where it defines multiple levels of conformance with itself, and then references specific ISO and DIN messages within it. So if those standards get updated, it has to get updated. It's a mess. And I think maybe California could be a leader on this and try to standardize standards so to make them productive.
Are you doing are you working on this? Like, what's your research?
My research is broadly in EV infrastructure.
Aaron is a postdoc with us.
Oh, you're a postdoc. Well, can we set up a time for you to meet with some of our, let's follow up after I.
Yeah.
Yeah, my advisor is our lead on interoperability, so he'd be the right one for you to talk to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else can fix some of our problems?
I definitely can't fix this problem, but I was curious, talking about hardening the infrastructure for against wildfires. Is this something they actually know how to do? Because I've been through the wildfire experience, so I know that just putting stuff underground is not enough. Like,
Mhm.
it is absolutely destroyed, like water and sewage lines that are far underground. And with the root
Yeah.
fires that get going,
Yeah.
it gets hot there for weeks or even, more than a month. So are they actually like testing things? Do they know how to do this
I don't know.
safely?
I honestly don't know. It's out of my range of expertise.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you were first.
Where does like local light rail play in part with like zero emission transportation? There's like one example in Sacramento, like it isn't even a light rail that goes to the airport,
Yeah.
Like how is that prioritized in this? Like this is moving people, this is moving freight. I think larger cities like Chicago, New York all have light rail connectivity or train or subway, but I feel like the West Coast is a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, Bay Area obviously is great, but how does what's the prioritization of local, just public transportation as far as zero emissions?
Well, so CARB has developed an innovative clean transit rule, so transit buses are covered. And some, I know like San Francisco Muni is part of it, counted in the, I'm not sure about light rail, like that is more inter-regional. I'm not sure whether CARB has prioritized that. I would say, they tend to go with the tons or with the amount of emissions that are from. And so that's why they focused a lot on diesel pollution reduction as their main focus. Yeah.
Thank you for presentation. I have two questions about first, I want to know that you mentioned that you want to replace EV charger instead of gas fueling, but for example, using hydrogen for charging can be challenging for people, especially about safety, because when you want to implement a charging that needs hydrogen for its work, definitely it needs to meet some requirement about the safety, and it's possible that people resist to use this staff and opportunity for using this new technology. And I think all of these plans are limited to some specific location, a specific climate. For example, if you want to use solar energy, we need a sunny environment, sunny climates. But for example, if you want to improve your plan to the other states that, for example, they have a lot of snow, they have cold weather, how you can implement your plan on that cities, on that region?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because, of course, like battery performance shifts when it gets very cold.
Yeah.
Your range goes down for sure, and also you're using a lot more of the battery just to heat up the inside. So Gil and I were actually in Norway this summer, and we talked to the bus people, and Norway is very cold, and they are at like 97% zero emission electric vehicle sales as of last month, for that month. And they're electrifying like everything, buses, construction equipment. We saw construction equipment in operation. And I would say the bus guy was really fun to talk with. He was really very pro EVs, very pro what they were doing, very pro using technology to map out exactly how much energy is going to be needed and how they keep the buses moving. But he did give this example of when they had like a terrible cold freeze, and it was the first year with the buses, and the buses didn't finish their routes. And people were pissed. But he didn't come at it like this is the end of the world and electric vehicles are terrible. He was like, oh no, this is a technology problem. We just have to tweak our technology so that we know what to do when there's an extremely cold period. And this was like one of the coldest, longer periods on record in Norway in recent times. So it was an unusual, constellation of events. But I do think it takes more planning and more, you're gonna encounter barriers, and some transit districts in California, for example, have switched to hydrogen because they're like, batteries are too much, they're not working for our needs. And I think what you're seeing is like, people are looking at today's experience and assuming that's what it's gonna be like tomorrow. And really, today's experience is early, and batteries are getting better and better and better. And so it's like, how do you help with the naysayers today who have legitimate concerns to give them the assurance that the technology is getting better, that the experience is going to improve, and that just proactive planning can actually address at least some of the concerns today. Yeah.
I was wondering what kinds of policy work, if there's policy work going into trying to shift behavior or trying to shift and increase energy consumption during the times you have more renewables on the grid. Like, for example, like
Me too.
the pricing signal.
Yeah, we're in the middle of that. So the big investor-owned utilities are required to move to time of use pricing. And we want to incentivize charging in the middle of the day. You run your vehicles on solar, on sunshine, and you pay the cheapest amount for that. So that is happening right now. It's going to be a really interesting experiment to roll out to see how sensitive individual consumers are going to be to prices.
I guess I'm maybe wondering about the grid's battery storage. Like, are there price signals for these battery operators to try to are they and what are they like? Is electricity just cheaper in the middle of the day, or is there a chance? Is there a way to incentivize them by paying them to charge?
So all this is happening. That's why that battery growth was so staggering, is because of the incentives for storage and the amount of money that the owners of the battery get for deploying that energy back to the grid when we need it. It's all about economic signals. And a lot of it, you saw there was a sliver of residential that was happening. And of course, individual consumers are completely not aware that they are a virtual power plant. You know what I mean? I mean, they know I got reached to sign up for this thing and I get some money. That's probably as much as they understand. But their battery is working every day to send energy back to the grid, and they don't even know it.
For people online, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great presentation. I want to ask something regarding the longer term goals of CEC after 2045.
Yeah.
Because based on this presentation that I just seen, looks like if we can change the entire fleet of buses to electric, if we can change all the vehicles on the road to electric or hydrogen, most of the job regarding the topics that were touched in the presentation will be resolved.
Yeah.
And after that, it looks like to me that it will be mainly about optimizing the infrastructure for hydrogen and electric, and that's all. But I'm wondering, especially because at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about your passion for climate change even before it was a thing.
Yeah.
How much of the work is also related to the behavioral change of Californians and the entire United States? Because as you mentioned, California can be the new Michigan in a way that it's a better version of Michigan with everything being electric, but everything is still based on the private vehicles, and the per capita energy consumption is still very high, even if it's coming from the electricity. So based on your background in the Union of Concerned Scientists, what do you think about the future, the longer term goals of CEC, and the larger change that we need to reverse the climate change impacts?
Yeah, well, in a way, ironically, I'm talking about the low hanging fruit right now. Electrification, it's kind of a low hanging fruit. We don't have it perfectly figured out, but we know this transition is happening, and it's happening globally. With reducing the amount of miles traveled per vehicle, that's harder. We struggle with that. And that's actually a key part of our strategy as a state, not so much the CEC, other agencies, but it's like, how do you reduce the amount of per vehicle miles traveled? You may want to increase the passenger miles traveled as you decrease the vehicle miles traveled. And so that's a big challenge. I would say industrial decarbonization is a big challenge, and ag is a big challenge. So those are areas I think that we don't have our perfect strategy yet mapped out.
Let's take one question online, Brian.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, Patty. This is Brian Johnston with Nissan. Thanks for your great presentation today. Just have one question and one comment. In terms of the question, DOE recently released the National Transmission Planning Study. And one item that I found interesting out of there was the idea that for every dollar invested in new transmission lines, that you could save somewhere between $1.40 and $1.60 of other, system costs. And sort of their real big takeaway was that if transmission lines, were able to span, storm patterns, for example, so going across multiple states, you could potentially not spend as much money on battery storage because you could just bring in power from other locations. And in particular, thinking of California from Midwest wind. And I'm just wondering how, how is California approaching? I know CAISO's got their 20-year transmission plan, but is it going way off to the west to the east and looking at, sort of the middle of the country as a source for renewable electricity? That's the question. And then just one quick comment. When we were talking about bidirectional charging, one challenge for an automaker is that currently the ACC2 customer assurance measures don't really accommodate in terms of, battery and warranty and durability, don't really accommodate non-vehicle or non-driving battery use. So mild bidirectional from say 30-40% state of charge to 60% state of charge probably wouldn't affect the batteries much. But CARB did not add in like a virtual miles or a battery reserve. So it is one challenge with where these demonstration projects will be important to understand, really what are the grid uses of vehicle batteries and how they would impact, the battery's health overall. Thank you.
Hey Brian, nice to hear your voice. Let me tackle that last question first, about batteries. We're gonna work very closely with the Air Resources Board. This has to be like something we do in close collaboration with the Air Resources Board. I will say, talking with individual car companies, they're already building this capacity and they don't think it would degrade their battery, at least several of the companies I've talked with. So, this will be an interesting area for exploration going forward, I would say. On the transmission side, that's not my area of expertise, so I'm not even gonna try to, I honestly don't know enough about how CAISO is planning on the transmission side. Yeah, just not my area.
It is a substitution between transmission and storage, but I don't know about California and what the cost benefit here.
I don't know enough about that.
I have two comments about the Brian's questions. The first question, the transmission lines, we should consider the loss because every time that we increase the voltage or decrease the voltage by the transmissions, it costs us 5% of the efficiency of the energy. We lose the 5% of the energy. So if we want to bring it from the East Coast or from the Dakota, it depends on the distance that we are bringing it. Maybe it's not that much beneficial. For the bidirectional charger, we had a study with Gil about the virtual miles traveled that we imposed to the vehicles. Depends on the charging rates that we have. For example, if we use a 6.6 bidirectional charger, it means that on average, we are adding 25,000 miles a year per battery. But if we use a 12 kilowatt charger, on average, we are adding about 40 to 45, 50,000 miles mileage on the battery. So we are suggesting to use the kilowatt hour charge instead of the year or the miles for the battery warranty.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Again, on the topic of batteries, so
you showed depot charging for medium and heavy duty trucks. And you showed that 500 kilowatt and talked about megawatt charges as well. So we were having this debate in our team, what if we install like fast chargers and get away with smaller batteries? But the point of many of the battery experts was that batteries are not able to accept that amount of power yet. So my question is whether CEC is anticipating like a lot of improvements in the battery technology in the next decade or so.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and we're right in the middle of like our next evaluation of charger needs, and Adam Davis, who came from, you guys probably know him, he's amazing. And so he's in the midst of this, and working with our research world, which includes UC Davis, but also NREL and Berkeley National Laboratory. And, you know, I think this is one of the challenges we're facing is like, how much do we just make prognostications versus what we're experiencing today? And I actually haven't met with the team about what they're proposing for the next round. So I'm curious as well.
Great. Well, one last question.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious, if you have any input or like expertise on the idea of like fast charging hubs specifically for multi-unit dwelling residents, because I'm pretty sure that's something the CEC is like into. And so are there any like successful stories, and then also kind of second to that, like, are there any creative solutions to lowering the price of DC fast charging specifically for renters?
So we're looking at that right now. I mean, honestly, we'd rather see level 2, even level 1 in multifamily buildings if we can, but often we can't get it in the physical building. It's just too expensive. And so then it's like proximate, and that's where DC fast charging and different models about, well, if you're going to have fast charging, how do you move those vehicles through? Because that's, you know, you can't have one vehicle sitting there all night. And we are seeing different models pop up, and some are exploring DC fast charging. And honestly, they're all so early, I don't know what's going to emerge as like the dominant one. And this is really gets to equity, I would say. And this idea, like, how do we make this an equitable transportation future for all? The one equity challenge I would highlight is that fast chargers sometimes charge more per gallon than gasoline. And so your lower income family that can't charge easily at home is then going to use fast charging and pay more than a rich family who has their own house. And so we're trying to figure out like also creative solutions on this equity side to make this a solution that works for lower income families. So they're the ones that are going to benefit the most from having cheap fuel. And we want them to have that home access if we can. If they can't have that home access, what do we do? And I don't have an answer. I would just say that's an equity challenge right now.
It's a good question.
Hey, can I just say, you guys are amazing. They're really good questions, really good thoughts. And I actually like some good takeaways and some connections we're going to make with our technical folks. But just, you know, just appreciate you asking so many good questions, and then like what you're doing to help us create a better future where people can get to their jobs and families can get their kids to school, and we can do it all in a way that's safe and equitable. And it's a big challenge, and it's really cool to see people from all over the world coming here to tackle this challenge. So thank you for your work and coming to Davis, a cool place. Let's fix the world.
Okay, thank you, Peg.